Hello everyone, my name is Legend Ronnie and this game is Rise of Kingdoms. My 5 infantry marches. That sounds a little bit strange, isn't it? A Cav player being able to do 5 infantry marches. But yes, my 5 infantry marches. If I want to do 5 infantry marches and my desired 5 infantry marches, if I would have all the legendaries or all the commanders maxed out at my discretion. And then it's gonna be the third set, which is gonna be probably the most optimal infantry marches that you can do with the actual commanders in the game. The only reason that would probably stop me right now to do 5 infantry marches on the field is the skills of the commander. So that's why you probably never seen me using infantry on the field. I also don't have enough T5s for that. I do have T4s. Probably can try it, but again, I have too many Cav maxed legendaries. First thing first, like usual, you guys need to see this just for a couple of seconds. You want to know the stars and the sculptures that you need to upgrade legendaries and epics. You also want to know that talents only apply from the primary commander and equipment also only apply from the primary commander. Your second in command is always a skilled carrier. So my 5 infantry marches that I can do right now into the game. The first one is gonna be Richard and Ethelflaed. And I have to tell you now that in any of the pairs that I will do, Richard and Ethelflaed, they will always be there. Now if I would do a Richard and Ethelflaed pair, I would definitely get him to level 60. That means I will get him to 6-star as well. I would not use a level 50 commander on the battlefield, probably not with these skills either. But if I would actually want to do 5 infantry marches right now, for whatever reason, I would definitely get Richard to 60. So Richard and Ethelflaed, the first one. The second one for me will be Eulji Mundok and Alexander the Great. So we have Eulji Mundok over here and we have Alexander the Great over here. This is going to be my second march. The reason I'm putting Eulji with Alexander is because they are both very nuking oriented. So this is pretty much going to be my nuking march. My third march is going to be Charles Martel primary with Scipio Africanus second. So this is going to be my second tanky march because Richard and Ethelflaed is also pretty tanky because of the heals and all the damage reductions that the defense tree can bring you. Charles Martel and Scipio will going to be my second tanky march with max counterattack damage. This is also my third march that I mentioned about. The fourth march is gonna be Santu primary with YSG as a second in command. Now this is gonna be also my nuking march, my AoE nuking march, Santu with YSG. So this is a total of 4 marches so far. And my fifth march is gonna be Joan of Arc primary with Constantine as a second in command. Now, the reason Constantine is not first is because John is 60 and Constantine is 30. So even that Constantine has the infantry talent tree, it makes a lot more sense to put John primary. Even that she's not infantry, she is level 60, so can bring more troops and has a lot of talents. So this would be my 5 infantry marches on the field if I would have to do 5 infantry marches as right now. I also want to give you guys some advices because there's probably a lot of players that are probably trying this. They're probably trying to do 3-4 marches of infantry and they're probably wondering how you should pair your commanders for that task. My advice would be that if you plan to do a lot of infantry marches, you should also have players that can do a lot of damage. So at least if you're going and tanking for them, you can also have someone to back you up and do the damage for you. You're doing damage as well. You have marches that do damage, but usually those will be the first to be targeted. The reason I'm using Richard with Ethelflaed is very simple, is to try to empower the extra damage and keeping Ethelflaed as long as possible on the battlefield, meaning that you will debuff your enemies as much as possible, and Richard can actually do that with his healing and defensive capabilities. Not to mention his talent trees, infantry and defense together, they are very strong. Plus, once you obtain his expertise, every 10 seconds decreases target's march speed by 50% for 5 seconds. That's pretty insane. He also reduces the march speed with his primary, and Ethelflaed also reduces the march speed. There's quite a lot of march speed reduction that you can do with these two commanders. The second march that I mentioned was Alexander the Great and Eugene Mundok. Well, obviously would be Eugene Mundok primary, but the reason behind it is that they are both very nuking oriented. They both have direct damage factor, reducing defense of the target, attack and defense, and if they get swarmed, you have strike back, which increases troops damage by 100%. And with the amount of attack that Alexander brings on the battlefield, this could be a quite powerful strike back from Eugene Mundok. Now, the third march I mentioned was Charles Martel and Scipio Africanus. The reason behind it is that Charles Martel is a very defensive commander, and Scipio is also oriented on being very defensive. On top of that, for 2 turns, 100% attack, when you have a very defensive march, that's pretty sweet if you pair them together. Now, as long as this one is up, the military life, and you have a max Charles Martel, you have 55% counterattack damage bonus. That's pretty sweet. Plus you can bring another 10% more troops, which means more infantry. Once your troops get under 40%, I really think they need to rework this. The healing factor is 500, it's also small. If they would rework this and make it like 60 or 70%, this would be a very sweet skill for Scipio. But again, beggars can't be choosers, so we work with what we got. Also, damage taken reduction as well. Yeah, Charles and Scipio, they can be very tanky. Now, the fourth march is Sun Tzu and YSG. We all know the reason behind it is that the amount of skill damage they both do together. The synergy between Sun Tzu and YSG is pretty insane. You have AoE with Rage Restoration all together. That's just too sweet to pass by. So definitely Sun Tzu, YSG, they work very well together with just infantry, because that's why you put Sun Tzu primary. And the fifth march I mentioned about Joan of Arc primary, and I already said the reason why Joan is primary is because Constantine is 30, but if I would have a max Constantine, it would be obviously Constantine primary and Joan second. Now, the idea behind this is that if people would actually see a Joan of Arc on the battlefield, they would definitely go and actually try to swarm it. But if you have a Constantine, which gives you 40% health, some damage reduction, and attack reduction to any target, this could actually make the build a little bit more tankier than you think. Especially when you get a skill damage. When Joan of Arc buff is up, that will be the most beneficial way for you to have that 30% health plus this 70% health. That skill damage would almost not mean so much. And you have the big heal, obviously, when you get under 50% strength in troops, which also helps you stay longer on the battlefield. You're buffing all your other marchers, so there's nothing wrong with using Joan and Constantine together, or Constantine and Joan together. So this is my 5 that I can do right now. And now I'm also gonna tell you my dream 5 marches, if let's put it like that, with the current infantry that is available in the game. 2 marches, they do not change. So Richard and Ethelflaed, they do not change on the dream marches. If let's say you have all the legendaries or all the commanders maxed, Richard and Ethelflaed, they do not change. Sun Tzu and YSG, they also do not change. I will still keep them together. So you're still using an epic, which is kinda legendary material, but yeah, it's epic. The third march would be Charles Martel and Wu Zetian. Now, I'm gonna talk about them when the time comes, but this would be the third march, Charles Martel and Wu Zetian. So the fourth march would be Constantine primary and Mehmet II as a second in command. And the fifth march would be Alexander the Great primary with Julius Caesar second. Now, this can actually be swapped around a little bit because you also have Frederick over there. So if you want to do Alexander and Frederick, and you want to do Constantine and Julius, so you can swap a little bit around it. You can, but this would be my advices. Now let's talk about the pairings that I haven't talked, because I already talked about Richard Ethelflaed, Sun Tzu, YSG. Let's talk about Charles and Wu Zetian first, because this probably sounds really interesting to you. Now if you look at Wu Zetian, her primary skill works perfect. It doesn't mention anything about Garrison, and you have a little bit of healing factor there, which is pretty sweet. So the Lion Rider is no reason to talk about it, because this one doesn't actually work on the battlefield. But the Tears of Blood, this one actually works on the battlefield, and you're benefiting from troops defense and health bonus. In the same time, you have chances to silence the target. Then we go to the fourth skill, where the skill damage taken reduction, it doesn't work. We're already reading over here, when commanding the garrison, incoming skill damage is reduced by up to 15%. And then it's mentioned over here, your troops have a 50% chance to increase their defense by up to 20% for 2 seconds. So this second part, I do believe that you should definitely benefit from it on the battlefield. It needs to be tested. Obviously, I haven't tested because I don't have the skill unlocked. In theory, this should definitely work on the battlefield as well, and you get another 20% defense bonus. On top of that, we go to the expertise, which this is kind of the sweet part. Counterattack damage plus 20%. Charles Martel already has 30%. With 20%, you have 50% counterattack damage, and incoming attacks have a 10% chance to deal damage to the attacker. Damage factor of 500. Now, in theory, if you get swarmed, this should actually go on multiple ways. I'm not sure if it actually works like that. I haven't looked that carefully. When it's a Wu Zetian in Garrison, maybe on the battlefield works differently. I don't know, haven't actually looked, but the way it is described, it should actually or give you a chance to hit multiple targets if you get hit by multiple targets. So that was Charles and Wu Zetian. Again, very good synergy for field battles. There's nothing wrong with it. Then I mentioned about using Constantine with Mehmed. Now the reason behind it is that Constantine on his own is very tanky and very defensive, and if you're doing 5 infantry marches, you also might just want to bring a little bit of damage on the battlefield. Now, if you have a max Mehmed, you can definitely do that. There is skill damage, there is AoE once you obtain the expertise, 1350, there's nothing wrong with it, you can bring more troops. The same can be Frederick as well, 50% troops capacity, but that is single target. So if you do field battles, I believe that Mehmed can actually give you a little bit more option, because he does area damage, so you can hit much more targets. And after that, I mentioned about Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. Now the reason behind it, the reason I would put Julius Caesar with Alexander is because Alexander with infantry and attack doesn't actually have so much defense packed. So he's very much oriented in dealing a lot of damage. Now Julius Caesar with expertise will bring you 15% more troops capacity, and for infantry it does make a difference. On top of that, you have damage taken reduction, an additional damage taken reduction once your troops have been reduced to less than 60%. And I am telling you that whenever Julius Caesar is being reduced under 60%, he becomes very hard to take down, just because of his second skill. On top of that, he has his primary skill with additional attack and defense plus all damage by 30% for the next 5 seconds. Now imagine that Alexander has his second skill with damage factor, can also be very much empowered by the primary skill from Julius Caesar. So there you go, pretty good synergy. As I said, it's also a very good synergy with Frederick, so you can also do Constantine with Frederick or Alex with Frederick, but then they will be very weak, you'll have no defense. So you want to make at least 4 tanky marches, because Sun Tzu and YSG, they will be not so much tanky, they will do a lot of damage, but the other marches will be very tanky. So this would be 5 infantry marches that I would do on the battlefield if I have all the commanders maxed out. Now I'm gonna give you the third option for infantry commanders, and that would be probably the best one, to tell you the truth. But if you just want to do infantry, that's entirely up to you. So the 5th option would be including Saladin primary with Takeda as a second in command. The reason behind it is that Saladin and Takeda, they could be some very darn tanky cavs, and that could be something very, very exciting that you can bring on the battlefield with also a little bit of healing in it. And that would be very, very surprising, and that would debuff the target, which pretty much that's what infantry needs. Now, if that would be the situation, the only adjustment that I would do is I would pair Alexander with Constantine. Either you put Alexander primary or you put Constantine primary. For more tankiness is Constantine primary. For more damage you put Alexander primary. So that would be the only modification from the previous. I'm gonna name them. It's gonna be Richard and Ethelfled. The first one is gonna be Alexander with Constantine, the second one, then you're gonna have Charles and Wu Zetian, the third one, and the fifth one you're gonna have Sun Tzu and YSG. I said fifth one, and then the fourth one would be Saladin and Takeda. So these would be the 5 marches, or the best way how you could actually pair the commanders. All these marches that I'm doing or I'm giving in this particular video are field battle oriented. So in 1 versus 1 you might not be able to get the same results, and if you're probably wondering why Alexander with Constantine, is for the simple fact that this particular skill it's only being affected when you get a shield. So when you get Alexander's shield, you have skill damage taken reduction by 40%. So this could be a very darn tanky combination, even though that Alexander is so nuking oriented. Plus, when this is maxed out, 15% troops attack is exactly what you need to actually empower Alexander a little bit. So the longer they survive on the battlefield, the longer you can do damage with Alexander. You're probably saying, but why not put Richard and Alexander, since they are kind of so inseparable, and maybe put Ethelfled with Constantine? That is very true, and that could also be an option if you want to put it like that. It's just that I do believe that this could also be some kind of a trap of a lot of players thinking that Alexander is weak. And having Alexander with Constantine primary, they can be, again, like I mentioned, very darn tanky. So if they would focus Alexander, you realize that you have Sun Tzu and YSG there that will keep pounding and doing a lot of damage. So there you go. You also kinda have to strategize whenever you do your marches, because you have to think how people actually react on the battlefield, or you have to see how people react on the battlefield. That's the best way you can do your marchers, so you can always try to invite them to actually attack something, and that your other marches will do damage, or your friends, and so on. Anyway, I hope you find this interesting. This is my 5 infantry marches, like I mentioned, that I can do. My dream 5 infantry marches that I would do, and the infantry marches that I would suggest with the commanders that I would suggest. Hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions, you can always drop them in the comment section below. This is Bola Geroni signing off. Peace out, yo. Take care.